There's a place in the Bavarian countryside, about an hour north of Munich, where a farm once stood on its own at the edge of a dark pine forest. It was called Hinterkaifeck, which simply meant the farm behind Kaifeck, the little village half a mile away. It was a lonely spot, the kind of place where the nearest neighbor is too far away to hear you. And in the winter of 1922, it was buried in snow. In the weeks before the end of that March, the family who lived there began to notice that something was wrong. It started with the footprints. One day, the head of the household, a 63-year-old farmer named Andreas Gruber, found tracks in the fresh snow. They came out of the forest and crossed the open field, leading straight to the farmhouse. But when he looked for the tracks that should have led away again, there weren't any. Whoever had walked out of those woods and up to his home had not, as far as the snow was concerned, ever left. Then there were the noises, footsteps in the attic in the dead of night. Andreas searched the house and found no one. A set of house keys went missing and never turned up. A newspaper appeared on the property, a Munich paper that nobody in the family had bought and that no one nearby even subscribed to. And there was one more thing, something that had happened months before and been half forgotten. The family's previous maid had quit her job and left the farm. She told people she couldn't stay any longer because she kept hearing footsteps and voices in the empty house, and she'd become convinced the place was haunted. Andreas Gruber told a few of his neighbors about the footprints and the sounds, but he didn't call the police, and life on the farm went on. Let me tell you who was in that house. There was Andreas himself, 63, by most accounts a hard and bad-tempered man. There was his wife, Cecilia, 72. There was their daughter, Victoria, 35, a widow whose husband had been killed in the war. And there were Victoria's 2 children, a 7-year-old girl, also called Cecilia, and a little boy, Joseph, who was 2 years old. And then, on the very last day of March, a new maid arrived to take the place of the one who had fled. Her name was Maria Baumgartner. She was 44, and she had never set foot on the farm before in her life. She would be there for a matter of hours, because that night, someone came for them. We don't know exactly how it happened, and we probably never will. But this is what the evidence seemed to say. One by one, it appears the members of the household were drawn out to the barn. Andreas, his wife, Victoria, and the 7-year-old girl were each killed there, in the dark, with a mattock, a heavy farming tool, something like a pickaxe that almost certainly belonged to the farm itself. Then whoever it was went back into the house, where the little boy lay in his cot and the new maid lay in her bed, and killed them too. In the space of a single evening, every living soul at Hinterkaifeck was gone. And then the truly strange part began, because whoever did this didn't run. They stayed. For days after the murders, the farm went on as if nothing had happened. Smoke rose from the chimney, the cattle were fed and watered. Food was taken from the kitchen. Neighbors who passed at a distance saw the smoke and thought nothing of it. The postman came and went, and all the while, a whole family lay dead in the barn, hidden under hay, and a murdered woman lay in her bed, and someone, some unknown person, was living there among them, sleeping under that roof, eating at that table, feeding those animals, keeping the fire lit. It was 4 days before anyone realized. By the 4th of April, it had become impossible to ignore. The little girl hadn't been at school. The family hadn't appeared at church, where Victoria sang in the choir. Their post was piling up, and so a small group of worried neighbors walked out across the snow to the lonely farm to see what was the matter. What they found there is not something I'm going to dwell on. It's enough to say that they found the family in the barn and the maid in her room, and that the men who made that discovery would carry the afternoon with them for the rest of their lives. The police came, and from the very beginning, the case defied them. There was no shortage of suspects. Robbery was considered and largely ruled out because money was found untouched in the house, which made little sense for a simple burglary. Suspicion fell hard on a neighbor, a man named Lorenz Schlittenbauer. He had been involved with Victoria. There had been a bitter dispute over who was the real father of little Joseph, and when he joined the search party, some found his behavior deeply unsettling. He seemed to know his way around. He unlocked doors without hesitation. He moved the bodies before the police had even arrived, which he explained, but which never quite sat right with the people who were there. Others were sure it must have been a drifter, a stranger passing through who had found an easy, isolated target. But none of it could be proved. No weapon was ever tied for certain to a killer. No confession ever came, and hanging over all of it were those impossible details from the weeks before. The footprints that led to the house and never left, the footsteps in the attic, the missing keys, the maid who ran because she thought the place was haunted. Put them together, and they point at something that is genuinely hard to sit with for very long. That the killer had not come on the night of the murders at all. That they had been there already for days, perhaps for weeks, hidden in the attic of that farmhouse, coming down in the dark, listening to the family below, learning their habits, waiting, living above them, unseen, until the moment came. In the years that followed, the case would not die. In a detail that tells you something about the time, the skulls of the victims were kept back by investigators for study, sent away to Munich, and, it said, eventually lost altogether. The farmhouse itself was pulled down within a year. Nobody wanted to live there. Nobody wanted to work that ground. A small shrine was raised on the spot instead. The investigation never truly closed. Decade after decade, it was taken up again, examined with fresh eyes, and set back down, unsolved. More than 100 people were questioned across the years. As late as 2007, a group of students at a German police academy took the whole case apart one more time, using modern methods, and they reached a conclusion. They believed they had worked out the most likely killer, but they chose not to release the name. The reason they gave was a simple, human one. There were still living relatives, descendants who would have to carry it. And after all this time, with no way left to prove anything in a court of law, they decided it wasn't theirs to say out loud. And so it remains, more than a century later. 6 people murdered in a lonely farmhouse in the snow by someone who may have been living in that house with them all along, and who stayed on for days afterward, feeding their animals while they lay dead. We don't know who walked out of that forest. We don't know who climbed down from that attic. We don't know who sat beside that fire in the days that followed, alone in a house full of the dead. And in all likelihood now, we never will.